So now we're going to talk about restricting the domain to find inverses of polynomial functions, because if you recall, if it has an even power, it's going to be having this kind of a behavior, and it won't pass a horizontal line test. So we have to cut that domain so we only have 1/2 of it. So if a function is not one-to-one, as I just described, it cannot have an inverse. If we restrict the domain of the function so that it becomes one-to-one, thus creating the new function, this new function will have an inverse. So how to restrict the domain of a function that is not one-to-one? Restrict the domain by determining the domain on which the original function is one-to-one. Replace, again, f of x with y, interchange x and y, solve for y, rename the function or pair of functions. I'm not sure what that was about. F inverse of x. Revise the formula for f inverse of x by ensuring that the outputs of the inverse function correspond to the restricted domain of the function. So we have two problems here. And let's see. So we're going to find the inverse of f. So where f is x minus 4 quantity squared for x being greater than or equal to 4. And then for being less than or equal to 4. Because this is a parabola at 4, so it's going to be going up like that. So we'll be looking at cutting this. So we'll look at this one versus this one. Okay, so start with A. So we'll say y equals x minus 4 squared. And the square root of y is plus or minus. Oh, I forgot to swap them. Oops. Let me do that. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Start over again. So we'll say y equals x minus 4 squared. So we swap x equals y minus 4 squared. We're trying to solve for y. So we can take the square root of both sides. So plus or minus the square root of x is the square root of y minus 4 squared. And we would have, we have plus or minus the square root of x equals y minus 4. Adding 4 to both sides, we would have 4 plus or minus the square root of x equals y. And this is where we have the two different functions out of this. So in the one case that we do have a pair of functions. So if we're looking for in the A case that it's being greater than or equal to 0, we'll be looking at the y is, think of it as square root of x plus 4. And that graph, so this is our original, and the graph would be it's going to be this. And so this is the inverse, so f inverse of x equals the square root of x plus 4. So that'd be for the original. So what I'm trying to get at, though, is that the output for this is the input for this function. So notice this outputs from 4 to infinity. This inputs from 4 to infinity. This one outputs from 0 to infinity. This one inputs from 0 to infinity. Now for B, the one that we're talking about the other half, we're talking about this half. That's going to give us the f of x, f inverse of x, is the negative of square root of x plus 4. So what does the negative do? It reflects it across the x-axis. So it's going to be down like this instead. So that this output is the input for this, the original, and the input for this is the output for the original. So those are the two graphs. Okay. Restrict the domain and then find the inverse of f of x equals x minus 2 squared minus 3. So once again, if we look at this graph, -2, so it's going to be over here 2, then up 3, or down 3, excuse me, down here. So it's going to be like that. So we have a choice, and typically we get rid of the negative half. So we would just keep the domain for this original function to go from 2 to infinity. So we'd have y equals x minus 2 squared minus 3. We could swap the x and the y, so x equals y minus 2 squared minus 3. And then we would add 3 to both sides. So x plus 3 equals y minus 2 squared. Then we would take the square root of both sides. And we could say plus or minus, but we were deciding to take the positive side of this. What we do have is plus or minus the square root of x plus 3 equals y minus 2, and then we can add 2. So 2 plus or minus the square root of x plus 3 equals y, or our f inverse of x is 2 plus or minus the square root of x plus 3. But we had to pick one of these two functions. So picking f inverse of x to be 2 plus the square root of x plus 3, that goes to the domain we've picked. So it's going to be back here, up there, so something like that. Okay. If we pick the other half, we'd choose the 2 minus. And that's it for this video.